I can tell you this, and I can tell you this without fear of any contradiction by anybody. One, that ACDL as an organization never supported Charles Taylor. Some members of ACDL supported Charles Taylor as individuals, perhaps even using the name of the organization. But that organization, in its main body, never supported Charles Taylor. And let me say here personally, I never supported Charles Taylor. Not a dime did I contribute at any time to the support of Charles Taylor. I don't hold it against anybody who did, because at that time, let's remember, the Taylor uprising here was popular. Large numbers of people. Remember the time they were saying, we want Chucky? Let Chucky come? There were lots of people who supported Charles Taylor. Tom Oyu has said repeatedly that in the meetings in which the question of support for Charles Taylor came about, I staunchly opposed it.
Did the ACDL as an organization adopt any posture on the conflict, and did it advance any proposals as to how it saw the conflict being brought to an end?
I think we supported the proposal for an interim government. Do you not remember this time there were several proposals floating around? And let me say, every Liberian wanted some kind of a solution. The Interfaith Mediation Committee was making some proposals. Everybody was trying to tweak at those proposals to find a way forward. Some Liberians here signed a document and say, well, let's have a transitional government for 6 months with Mr. Taylor, and let him thereafter turn over to somebody. He must be a transitional leader. There were others who came up with proposals say, no, let us put in a transitional government, and in 6 months, let's hold elections. I will not hold it against anybody who came up with an idea. The key here is that all of these ideas were rejected by Mr. Taylor. That is the important issue. Not that people were not trying. They were trying because they wanted a way forward. Even the Interfaith Mediation Committee's proposal that became the ECOWAS peace plan, he adopted and then rejected. We went to Yamoussoukro several times. He put proposals on the table. Everybody agreed to them, and then he rejected them. He went to Geneva. We signed an agreement there. He signed himself in Houphouët-Boigny's residence. By the time he got back into Ivory Coast, he said that signature was not his genuine signature. So I think these are the issues that are significant here, and not the efforts of a lot of individuals who, in good faith, were looking for one way or another to move this process forward.
So would you say then that your argument that you just presented, does it put to rest claims that Mr. Taylor would have entered into negotiations, but owing to the declaration by some politicians in Freetown at a meeting, signing a statement saying that they recognize Mr. Taylor should head the government, and that led to, or that sent to his grave the proposals to have an arrangement where there will be, all sides will be accommodated, in which Mr. Taylor will not be president, but would be free to contest elections.
That's utter nonsense. People who say that did not follow the proceedings very closely. Let me tell you what was even a better deal. Mr. Taylor and I met in the offices of President Iyadima in Togo. President Iyadima set it up that we would have one-on-one. We went in a room, and I said to him, Charlie, we need to find a way to bring peace in Liberia. I am ready to step aside anytime if there are ways in which we can help you because we know you have incurred expenses in all of this fighting. If there's any way we can make your expense part of a national debt so that we can then go to elections, we'll be ready to do so. You know what he said to me? He said, Baba, I got expenses you can't understand. That was Charles Taylor's response. All right? We met several times in Hufebwanye's house. In Yamoussoukro, we had a meeting at which, as I said this morning, Mr. Taylor complained that he didn't trust ECOMOG, but he had all of this territory under his control and he wanted to go to elections as quickly as possible. This was how the Senegalese came here. Remember, the Senegalese were deployed in, I think, in Lofa or someplace, and a number of other places. In Vahon. All right. And there were lots of people who were deployed, lots of forces deployed around this country. We were all set poised to go to elections once those forces were in fact deployed. As soon as those forces began the deployment, people around the country began to gain confidence. Many of them surged to Monrovia. Mr. Taylor saw this, and by that time suspected that he would have a difficulty winning elections, and put every obstacle in the way of going to the ballot box as a result of the Yamoussoukro meetings. So there was ample time, ample opportunities. The two things were being at stake at that time, One, that there should be disarmament. People must not vote with a gun to their heads. Two, there must be an electoral process. We must not just anoint somebody who had shot his way into power. What change would it have been? So the holding of free and fair elections, especially at a time when everybody knew that Charles Taylor was very popular. And the longer he took, there brought doubts, his own confidence perhaps in his ability to win elections diminished, until a brand new situation presented itself years later. So I think it is a misperception to think that one proposal among scores of proposals coming from various Liberian quarters, including from the Interfaith Mediation Committee, that any of those at any moment in those early stages would have made a difference. That is a stretch that is much too far, given the circumstances we know, much too far to accept.
So would you say that the apparent intractability that resulted, as well as the intransigence of Mr. Taylor, were they influenced in any way by extraneous factors such as regional or sub-regional interests or economic interests by external powers or so?
Well, I don't know. Like I say, when I had a one-on-one with Mr. Taylor, this is what he told me, that he had obligations. He never, spoke further on the obligations, what they were, and how he intended to meet them. He talked about obligations. I do know that President Hufebwanye seemed to have been convinced during the Yamoussoukro series, from what he had heard Mr. Taylor say, that he could win elections, and that the old man wanted to get those forces that Taylor wanted deployed so that we could move on. And by 1992, he was at a total loss that even with the deployment of those forces, nothing was happening. He called me, and I had a meeting with him, and he said, I don't know what is happening to your brother, Mr. Taylor. Your compatriot has let me down, because I was hoping that by now I would have been able to solve this problem. This was Hufwebweni 1 year before he died. All of those who had thought that the Yamoussoukro series of talks would have borne some fruits were disappointed, because at the end of the day, all of the demands that were made by Taylor, he reneged on all of them.
During this period, were there any engagement or any attempts to reach out to the Americans, or were they in any way involved in such discussions? Did they have any influencing capacity on the outcome of all these discussions that went on?
The Americans were the ones who were very keen on having us go to Yamoussoukro. Somehow they were convinced that because the Nigerians, and you remember at this time the Americans did not have a good relationship with Nigeria, they didn't like the military regime there, they were pressing President Hufwebweni to take the leadership in the hope that he could solve this problem. They too were at loss when this did not work. And so you had a situation where they were always in the background, but never taking responsibility to step up to the plate and do something about this situation.
Now, at the time you were meeting in Banjul, there were some attempts by the Americans to intervene, as was revealed by a former Secretary, Assistant Secretary of State, Cohen. At the time of the Banjul meeting, were you aware that the Americans had tried to reach an arrangement with Mr. Taylor and that would have seen President Doe leave Liberia through a corridor to Sierra Leone?
No, I was not aware of this. As a matter of fact, for a while we were using the Americans to transmit our messages to people on the ground here. They then told us that they would have to stop this because they did not want to get involved in the Liberian struggle. That is why we began to send people here on helicopters and by boat to bring messages here and to have some contact with what was going on here.